I am Heath Whitmore, farm with my dad. Whitmore Farms, we were established in 1915. I'm a fourth generation on the farm. We actually had a 100-year birthday last year. We farm 1,200 acres on the White River Prairie in East Arkansas. We're 100% irrigated. We originally farmed rice and soybeans, I guess, my whole life. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, as corn started coming in, we started taking out some of our rougher rice ground and going to corn and soybeans and got out of rice as much. My dad got out of farming in the early 80s, going through some times much like what we're dealing with right now from what I understand, with no government help at the time, I guess. And I got back in '89. I was about 13 and have pretty much been on there since then. Let's see, where I grow up, we have silt loam soil for the most part. It is very easy to work with. It drains well. We don't have much topsoil. We make most of our crop off of water and fertilizer. But the traditional way there is just to work the ground until it looks like a garden. That's just kind of what's been done my whole life. I graduated college in 2000 from ASU, and they had started talking about conservation tillage and introducing no-till and minimum till at that time. That was a very new thing to my process and on our farm. So my first crop year when I got with my dad, one of the very first things that we bought was a 750 no-till drill and Ed and Tipper roller, because I was the guy that plowed beans every day, and I was pretty much sick of it. So we just kind of started adapting to a little new system of farming. The first thing we did was try to start stale seed bedding rice. We would work our ground in the fall, smooth it down behind beans, and come back and just do a burn down in the spring and plant the rice into it. The ground was about twice as mellow. We started getting a more even stand, and we almost never had to flush because the ground just didn't crust. We started adding no-till acres we had some acres that we couldn't water at the time, so we started planting some dryland wheat and then some dryland soybeans. In '08, we bought our first planter that was actually set up for no-tilling, and we were still just kind of easing into this. Like I said, we started planting corn in '09, trying to take out some of our patches of rice that had 20 acres and 50 levee gates in them, just to kind of make it easier on ourselves. And what we started seeing, that corn and soybeans matched up obviously very well with a lot less labor involved, and we could start implementing more minimum till and more no-till into our operation just because we didn't have to knock down levees and completely restart the ground over. What we were hoping for when we started this whole thing was to save some money, maybe lose a little bit in yield, but save money, and so overall improve our bottom line. What we have seen was that we're making the same, if not more. And our soybeans, especially following corn, we really started seeing a yield bump, where when we started doing the no-till, we were seeing a better yield. My whole life, the better yield in the soybean fields would be behind rice and not behind soybeans. Well, as we started no-tilling and upping our planting dates a little bit, our beans behind beans started beating our beans behind rice. Well, when we started doing this with corn, we started seeing another bump there. I just want to kind of go through what our game plan is for the year, just kind of tell a little bit of our operation. I think everybody should start with variety selection. I'm an Asgrow fan, but I have nothing against anybody else. It's just always seemed to work with us. We believe in planting 3 or 4 different varieties, and I honestly don't care if you're farming 40 acres, if you're farming 4,000. I think you need 2 or 3 bell cows, and then you need 1 or 2 new things to try. But I know guys that are trying to farm 15 different varieties, and you don't get enough consistency in what you're doing between different fields and different weather patterns to really know what's working for you and what's not. So, like I say, we're pretty small, so we kind of stick with 1 or 2 main varieties, and then we try something new every year. We treat 100% of our seed because of the no-till situation, a little bit more matter that we're planting into every year, which will be our next thing on the schedule, I guess, coming up. We start with a pre-plant or pre-emerge herbicide mixture. Glyphosate and Verdict is our main thing. The residue was added if it's more of a pre-emerge right in front of the beans. Verdict has been the sharpened kick sword technology that BASF did has been a lifesaver for us. It's just changed the game. When we first started stale seed bedding the rice, we would have a carpet of poena a lot of times if we didn't do anything in the fall, and trying to get that dried out and get it to where that soil would actually bust up and seal back off when we were planting into it was almost impossible with just Roundup and stuff. About 10 years ago, we started seeing a breakthrough of mare's tail, which was new to us because, like I said, in our area, everybody tilled. And so having resistant weeds was something that was going somewhere else, but didn't happen where we were. We started treating that with 2,4-D, and then we just started seeing more escapes when, I guess about 5 years ago, when Sharpen and Verdict came out is when we started using it. I've got some pictures at the end of this that I can show you where we've really cleaned some fields up with it. But and then down at the bottom, as we get closer to planting, we've gone with Zidua the last couple of years. We've run some plots where we left out any type of residual with it, just went with Roundup and the Sharpen or Verdict, and literally in an 80-foot swath, we'll pull a truckload of pigweeds out of it. And the Zidua completely knocks that out for us, it seems like. Next thing we got, our system is on a 40-inch bed. We do 10-inch twin rows. Gives us a 30-inch middle between your two outside rows. I think that has worked really well for us for spacing. We have a lot of pretty flat ground. That big 40-inch bed, for one, lets us push water through some of those flatter areas, but it's not so wide that it won't soak up where we have a hillside. It also is big enough. Doing no-till in our area, if you stayed with just a 30-inch bed, I think over the winter you're going to lose most of your bed if you're not going with some type of cover crop or something. And so what we've done, we've stayed with that bigger bed just for erosion purposes almost, because we can get about 3 crops on one hip. And so a lot of times we'll come back through about every second or third year, and we run a hipper chopper, and we come through and we'll just kind of recondition them. It helps with drainage as far as cleaning the middles out. It helps with irrigation in the spring, and we'll pull a big enough bed that it looks like mini levees out there a lot of times when we start. But that by the third year, you'll see in a couple pictures, there's almost nothing there. I mean, we barely have enough to water and keep that crop up on top of the bed. With our soybeans, we shoot for 150,000 seeds to start with. Some of the conditions that we plant into, we will lose a little bit of stand, and so that ends us usually with about 130 to 140 seed count or planting population. Earlier planting, I mentioned a minute ago, as we've started doing this, it doesn't always out yield the later planted, but it is more consistent every time. And I'm talking, when I say early, I'm talking from the last week of March, and this is southeast Arkansas, up until the first part of May, where most of my life and my dad's life, they were waiting for the first week of May to after the 10th even. And what we've seen, the beans stay a little bit shorter, so you don't have to deal with near as much lodging, and it is a more consistent yield at the end. A few years ago, we quit applying fertilizer based simply on what we were trying to make and what we were projecting, and we just started building nutrient levels to a point where we were satisfied with where they were to handle what we were doing. And now what we do is we look back at the crop that we took off of those acres and try to replace that and hold that fertilizer level at that thing. We're pretty simple post-emerge mix with our soybeans. We've been running glyphosate and Flexstar with that. If you time that first application I was talking about correctly with the Verdict and the Zidua, we've been getting by with one shot of post-emerge almost every year. It'll carry far enough into it that we can, when we do this, it pretty well cleans it up, and we have canopy right after that. We fungicide all of the acres of soybeans that we raise. I don't know of a curative fungicide on the market. Almost all of them are preventative, and so we shoot for R3. We've done multiple test plots over the last several years, and every one that we've done, and I'm talking about quadrus, quilt, preactual, headline, domark, everything we've run, the control always is less than what we'll make with the other one. It's an insurance policy, in my opinion. The fungicide treated acre will always pay for itself, that what we've seen in soybeans. And then you catch a year where you really have some disease problem and something coming in, and it may pay for itself for the next 3 to 4 years. We've been using preactual for the last couple of years on some of our high yielding stuff that we've tried to push, some of our plots. We've started coming back in 2 weeks later and hitting it again with a second shot. Last year, every one that we did in every field that we tried that in, we were getting a 5 to 6 bushel bump on that second shot. I mean, you could really tell it almost to the row if you were driving by there, where it was staying green a little bit longer. Our insecticide program, I'd really need my crop consultant in here to tell you about more than anything, but we have a weekly scout that checks it. We go by the university thresholds. I wish we didn't have to spray for them, because it gets on my nerves. It's one of those things that just seems like it's a never-ending process. You finally think you're done and you're not going to get to spend any money from it a while, and then we come in and we have stink bugs, and it's one of those things that they tell me it works, so we go with it right now. On our irrigation schedule, which is something I think that I'd really like to streamline, it's one of the things I've been trying to attend some of the stuff while we're here this week. We try to wait as long as we can on our first shot of water. We've seen in years past, especially when we get some hot weather and a little bit later planted soybeans, if we water before R3, before those beans really start blooming, we get a huge growth right at the front, and we end up getting a lot of bean and not a lot of pod. It looks pretty. You drive down the road and you think, boy, I'm really doing something, but you're just out there with a lot of plant material, and those beans are tougher. I think waiting as long as possible lets that root develop and actually dig in a little bit. And once you start, what we do is we follow basically a 10-day schedule on our ground, and we hit them again if there's no rain. I would like to just streamline that, and because that's what we found that works for us, but there's really not a lot of scientific data to back that up. And so some of these pipe planter and faucet things have really piqued my attention. We begin harvest less than 14.5%. I know a lot of people have started using desiccation products around us. We don't yet. The only thing that I've seen beneficial to that is it gets you in the field faster. And there's some people you may be in one of those states where you got a bunch of rice or a bunch of something to get to, and that may be something you need to look at. But for us, it just hasn't made us any money. We use it around some edges. If we've had to replant because of deer problems or something like that, we come in and maybe just try to speed that area of the field up to get us going. As far as on the no-till part, some of the issues that we've run into at harvest is just really keeping an eye on the guy running the combine and the carts. If you're planning on doing a no-till setup, coming back into it the next year, simple things about just turning a cart around in the row that you don't think about will shut your drainage off for the rest of the year. And so the next year you have to go back in and do something different to recondition that row. Does the same thing on drain furrows on the end. So a lot of times during harvest we'll have to wait an extra day or two if we can, to keep from messing our fields up. Residue management is one of the big keys. When we started farming corn, you don't have to worry about the spread as much, but we started trying to burn, and I know that's a bad word for a lot of people, but we've made some extremely good beans behind a burnt cornfield where we've gone straight back in and planted it. I don't like the way it looks. I don't think it's really good for the soil. So through that, we've started implementing some cover crops in the last couple of years. We're going in now and we're burning our cornfields off, coming back and drilling cover crop into it. We've been planting a mixture of cereal rye. This year we went with cereal rye, clover, and tillage radishes. This year we've gone with black oats instead of as much cereal rye. If you deer hunt around it, the deer really like it, so that's just a side note. But that has really held our beds in place. After we've come through and we've burnt some of this corn stubble off, our beds were literally going to nothing just from erosion. And after this cover crop, we can come in and kill it and it ends the year. Our beds look just like they did when we got done with them the year before. We've also purchased a vertical tillage tool that it's a Great Plains rig that is literally has no pitch to the blades, has no angle to the blades. You can set it to where we can go through and just chop stubble up, and it does almost no damage to the bed. It's just a sizing of material so that you can get back in and plant the next year or run a hipper back through it. One of the other things that we deal with all year long is winter, or try to plan for, is this winter vegetation. As I said when we started, all we were doing was a spring applied burn down, and it was the weeds would just get out of control. You catch a year like this year where we had a warm December, and it gives another 10 days for those things to really grow and get a root in there, and we were ending up with a sod by the time we got ready to plant. We also started running into resistance issues with mare's tail, so we implemented fall burn down, and we were coming in with just straight Valor for a while. The last few years we've gone with 1 ounce of Valor, 1 ounce of Sharpen, and glyphosate. That will typically hold back our winter vegetation to where we can come in with our corn acres. We can literally plant straight into it without anything in front of it and clean it up with our first corn spraying. If we have to wait into April, typically with our soybeans is where we go with the glyphosate, verdict, and residual. That has worked extremely well for us. Some of the successes, I've already mentioned some of them. We've gotten improved emergence on all of our crops with little to no crusting. We almost never have to replant a soybean now planting no-till. It just almost never happens. Just that ground, our ground, that silt loam soil is bad about turning to concrete after it rains on it. And when you haven't disturbed that bed and you've got that residue from the year before, it just doesn't crust over, which has led to improved stand counts. We've gotten increased percolation in the soil through cover crops and also through just the remaining root system from the year before. When you go in there with a disc and you redo that whole thing, it just packs it all back together. When we're leaving that in there, a lot of times the sheet water that we see on our ground goes away before some of our neighbors will do. I didn't have a slide in here. We tried deep tillage through some of this and tried to work that in. On our ground, we couldn't sit. We saw absolutely no benefit from it. We sold every chisel plow and every ripper that we had on our farm. It was burning more diesel fuel, putting more tractor hours on, and we could not see any sort of yield bump from it. It also saves moisture as you move into late spring. Seems like our beans just stay healthier. They have a better color to them, and we get to wait almost a week sometimes on some of our neighbors before we start watering. So we've decreased field trips, lessened erosion, and saved on our overall inputs, which has increased efficiency. We are in the process of helping our soil health and just improved overall productivity. Like I said, I'd like to streamline some of this stuff, especially with our watering. What I just gave you is our basic game plan in a perfect case scenario. That's exactly what we do this year. As the year goes on and as the weather treats us, a lot of that will change. So you got to be ready to adjust. We did increase our cover crop acreage this year. I have about 300 acres in cover crop right now. I've got about 3 different blends. It's planted anywhere from straight no-till with a drill. We've flown some on and hipped it back in on some corn ground that we burn in. So the jury's still out on what's going to be the best and the most effective way on our. I did 60 acres where we burnt some corn off, flew it on. We did straight cereal rye. It's one of the prettiest stands I have right now. It cost about $15 an acre. That was the seed cost and the flying. That's cheaper than any of the burn downs that we were running. And so we'll be able to come back with the same exact mixture to kill it in the spring as we would if it was just straight winter vegetation, except we got to pick what's out there and we got to plant a certain population, so it's not just running rampant. I'd also talked to some guys about implementing a variable rate fertilizer program. Silt loam soil, it's pretty consistent, so that hasn't really caught on in our area. We don't have sandy bottom, or sandy hills and the buckshot bottoms in our area. So we've thought that most of our stuff stays the same. Well, what we've noticed over the last several years, just kind of watching the yield monitor our combine, it's starting to jump around a little bit more than it used to, and we're hitting some spots where we're blowing through the ceiling in some yields, and then right next to it, it's dipping down. And so what we're thinking is, we have some fields that we haven't disc and floated in 8 years. And so what we're thinking now is, we used to mix all this together and kind of move it around, and that silt loam soil, like I said, stayed pretty consistent. Well, our stuff now is going to be a little bit more area specific for our fields because we're not doing it. So that's what we're looking at going. But also, as we do that, like to upgrade the guidance on our combine so that we can do an overlay map if we do that, and actually see if we can actually help it and where it's coming from. Here's some pictures. As you can see, this is a tillage radish from last year. That thing's about as big around as a softball. When that hit the hard pan where we are, it started going the other way. That thing is about that long. About that much of it was out of the soil. That's how shallow we are, and what we're dealing with is. This is one of the. It's not our last bean field that we planted last year, but that's typically what we look like. This bean crop going in here is the third bean crop on this particular field. This is what it looks like before we planted. This is right after we plant. I had sprayed glyphosate, verdict, and residue on this the day before, and as you see, the ground just falls apart, but you can tell there's not a whole lot of bed left. We'll re-hip this field. That field is on one of my dad's farms, and it yielded about 78 bushels to the acre, and that's how it started. We did an article for Delta Farm Press this summer, and the guy that they sent down for the article took his picture. He, while we're standing in this field, we liked about 2 fields finishing up. Every farm around us, there were people discing and floating, because we'd all just got done planting corn, rice, or grain sorghum, and we were finishing up planting beans while everybody else was finishing up getting the ground ready. And so that's one of the main benefits that we've seen is keeping that early time frame by being ready to go.
How does the planter do planting right on those stalks and that root?
We run that. We have coulters that run in front of it, and we were scared to death of that. We actually bought an old a bed conditioner that looked kind of like a do-all that just had the blades on it the year before, just to knock some of that down, and because we thought it might give us some trouble. And then we planted into it, and you don't even know it's there. I mean, it just literally parts it right out of the way and funnels it over to the edges. And this was a field that we did not get the fall burn down on in the fall of 2014. As you can see, it is very grown up in buttercups. It's the same field right here. This was on May the 1st. I sprayed this with 22 ounces of glyphosate and 8 ounces of verdict, which is, you have to wait 2 weeks before you plant. This is May the 14th. It's the same field. That's what it looks like in almost the same spot right there. I don't know if you can see it well enough, but that's corn stalks that are standing up out there that are about knee high that you couldn't even see in the previous picture. That's how quick it killed it. That's what it looks like out of the same field. That field cut in the mid 70s also, and there's just a field as it started coming up. That's my dad standing in it. Same field, and that's me as it's growing. And so, as you can see, we get a lot of questions because when you drive by, like I said before, everybody in our area is wanting it to look like a garden. And when you drive by our fields, it definitely does not look like a garden. When we start, it looks pretty rough. But a month into it, we're looking at this right here, and we have saved lots of trips, and then that's the finish. So that's really about all I had. If anybody has any questions.
Does a no-till keep you from getting in the field early?
We usually have to wait a day or two because we don't have the option to go in there and bust it open and air it dry like everybody does around. But we're sitting on go most. I mean, you can wait a day or two, but in a year like this year, waiting a day or two may be a lot cheaper than running. So
On your cover crop, talking about your cereal rye, the black oats and all, what kind of mixture you running? We're running utility radishes, but we have been mixing. Try some of that.
We are running, last year we did, it was a 5-seed blend, and it was cereal rye, triticale, crimson clover, tillage radishes, and an oat. I think it was a Jerry oat. I thought that was too many seeds in one thing. Like we really weren't getting the benefit of like the clover and stuff like that because we had to cut it down so much. So this year we went to just anything that was going into corn or rice that might need the nitrogen. We ran black oats, which has that allelopathic effect that's supposed to choke back pig weeds and mare's tail. Right now it looks pretty good. We didn't get it planted quite as early as we did the cereal rye from the year before because it was so dry this fall. We had to wait till about the 15th of October to plant it, and we'd really like to plant it at the end of August.
Can I remember how many pounds of each? Just
Out
of 3 maybe?
I wish I could remember the exact plantings. Well, no, that's fine. I should have had a note on it. We shot for about 35 pounds an acre for the blend. And I want to say it was like right around 5 pounds of clover and 5 pounds of radishes, and then the rest was in the oats. Anything that we did that was going into soybeans, we left the clover out because it was a little bit more cost, and the beans didn't really need the extra nitrogen. And I want to say it was about 8 pounds of radishes, and we were shooting for 30 pounds out of a drill. What I liked about it, adding the cereal rye or the oats to it, you can run it through a no-till drill, and that was my biggest I didn't have to pay a pilot to fly it over there, or try to get a buggy set to where I could do it. And so we can dump it in a drill and plant it. And part of that also knocked down some stubble. I have 25 acres drilled into some standing corn stubble that we didn't do anything to. We just pulled into it and drilled into it and got a perfect stand. It looked pretty rough, but I think there's going to be enough bed left that we can actually plant back into it again this year. The other, with the cover crop, like you were talking about the no-till, once we kill that, it kind of makes a blanket between the ground and the planter. And so we've actually, last year where we were scared to death about getting into that, we got to get into those fields a little bit earlier than the fields that were just bare and looked drier, because that mud was kind of sticky, when it's chilly in the spring anyway. And so it was kind of like a little buffer between the planter, and we didn't get any stop-ups or anything like that in our seed tube. So we actually, where we thought we were going to be later getting in, we got in a little bit earlier. So, go ahead.
How much of your yields increase from, normal tillage to cover crop?
We started we're not big, and so we kind of focus on pushing yields anyway. And we started hitting 70 bushels to mid 70s almost 15 years ago with our beans, and we just could not get over the hump. To be honest with you, we'd get close to 80 every now and then. We went to 100% no-till or minimum till about 3 or 4 years ago, and the last 2 years we have 2 years ago, the last 400 acres of beans that we cut ran about 82 to 83 bushels an acre. We've cut some plots that are running over 90, and so we're gaining. I would say we're gaining 5 to 7 bushels pretty consistently now. And we service our tractors once in the spring, and then we service them again the next spring. So we're saving lots of hours and lots of time. We actually bought another planter this year, and we're going to run 2, so that we're able to actually, as soon as something gets dry, if both, the last 2 years, there's just 2 of us in our operation. One of us has been standing there watching the other one run a tractor, and so this year we're going to run 2 planters and plant corn or beans or whatever is the first to get ready. So.
Have your cover crops increased your yield though?
Like I said, last year was this 2015 crop was the first year behind it. I did not see a yield bump. I saw some benefits from it. Like I said, it held we definitely didn't lose anything on erosion. I honestly think cover crops are going to be one of those things that you're investing in for maybe an 8, 9, 10 year period down the road. It's maybe not something you're going to see right in your pocket, but what I tried to do this fall is, if we don't do a burn down in the fall, if we don't run Valor or something it looks like that field that I showed you that was the yellow, where we have no control over what's going out there. Well, the cover crop cost is about the same to maybe even cheaper in spots as what I was running in my burn down. So if I can plant the cover crop for the same price as I can do my burn down, and it's gonna help erosion and help me way down the road, increasing organic matter, maybe get me in the field a little bit faster, then I would rather go with the cover crop and just save and come back with a little bit heavier dose of chemical in the spring. So.
So you buying another planter, how many planters do you run now?
We're just running one. Like we have 1,200 acres, so we're pretty small. We were running one planter. We were looking at upgrading, possibly going a little bit bigger. And what we just the last couple of years, we've been in the situation where we were set up to plant corn, and we had fields that were going into beans that were dry enough to plant, and the process of swapping everything over to go the other direction, sometimes just, like I said, it was just more trouble than we thought it was worth. And so what we got to looking at was possibly just, instead of going to a bigger planter and speeding it up, we just decided to go to 2, because a lot of times we had a tractor sitting there. And so now we're going to set one of them up for each. So.
Do you ever need to run road planters, or that's not a problem?
Do what now?
Road planters?
I don't know. We looked into some, but we've not run into a situation where we've even needed them. We tried to take those cultures off, and because when you're, especially in the early spring, when you're trying to plant and that's wet, sticky mud's down there about that deep, we were trying to get away from that. And but every time we try to take the cultures off, we would run into some stubble issues every now and then, like getting inside the packing wheels and that kind of deal. All right.